Hello, this is Ryan from Ready Rhino One, and for today's podcast, I want to talk a little bit about video games. So, video games are something that I grew up with. They played a pretty big role in my life. In that, I played a lot of video games when I was younger, and I've played a decent amount of video games throughout my life. I don't want to say that it was some kind of foundational pillar that defines who I am, but it's definitely played a pretty large part in my life. Something that I've enjoyed in many ways throughout the years. And I know video games at one time had a kind of a negative stigma associated with them. Not so much, if I'm being honest, when I was growing up. This would have been late 80s, early 90s, but I'm pretty sure it did for people who lived earlier than that when they were playing video games. But it's become more widespread. Many people from different walks of life now enjoy video games, and so there's a much greater acceptance of it. And growing up as a child, video games were very convenient entertainment choice. I mean, rain or shine, right? I mean, if it was pouring down rain, you couldn't really go outside. You had video games. If it was too hot or too cold, you had video games. If maybe you kind of exhausted anything you could think of doing outside, like I don't really want to feel like playing baseball. I don't really want to play soccer. I don't really want to try to build a fort. I kind of don't really want to do anything with Legos right now. I just want to play a video game. It was always kind of this accessible option. And then being able to play with friends was always really nice. And sometimes your friends got games that you didn't have, and vice versa. And so you could trade games and just kind of a good time with them. And so that was always a very fun option as a kid growing up to have that. And throughout the years, my tastes in video games had changed. Um, some of the things that I found entertaining then, I don't really find entertaining now. But there are some things that have remained. I've always really liked RPG type games, and I've grown to kind of enjoy them in a lot of different ways throughout the years. When I was growing up, RPGs were kind of a nice game because they tended to be long games, right? So they were games you could really kind of invest in, and you felt like you were investing in a character, and you were building him up, and you had this thing that you had been kind of slowly molding and making, and you got to see it as a character change and evolve in relation to the story that was being played out. And some of this stuff was just very fascinating to me, and I really enjoyed it. And so, that's why I've continued to really enjoy those types of games, even when in my adulthood now. I still do enjoy a lot of these types of games. They've always kind of provided this, I want to say moderating force, not to put too much emphasis on it, but I mean, when times are tough, they can provide a brief escape. When times are just kind of meh, they're a nice kind of a distraction or, something to do. And when times are extremely exciting, when there's a lot going on and you really feel pumped and motivated to do things, I find, at least personally for me, I need to decompress a little bit from that. And so video games again kind of provide that for me. And so I've always kind of found it to be this moderating force in my life. And so that I've been pretty appreciative of that as well. Personally, I have some struggles with ADHD, which I've always had throughout my life. It makes it difficult to sometimes concentrate all the time, and so I find that I need some kind of small distraction. And it's not to say that I have to be playing video games all the time, but it usually manifests itself in me, constantly moving my leg around, kind of bouncing it up and down, or sometimes I have to have things in my mind to kind of help occupy um, things just to kind of help me concentrate on other things. So having some kind of background distraction, I think people who need to have the TV on in the background to really focus, it helps them, and stuff like that can really help me. And so video games sometimes provides that, and so I'll have a hard time focusing for very long periods of time, and so video games provide like a really quick escape, to kind of change things a little bit, change my surroundings, change my focus a little bit for like maybe 5, 10 minutes. It's nothing big at all. And then you can get right back to it and, get to focusing down again. But, video games are, for me, just have this really good special place, for me to enjoy them, and it has a lot of practical benefits for my life. And again, as I get older, I start to really appreciate how video games have evolved. It used to be just kind of, you had a little character blasting things and moving around, and storytelling became more richer in some of these things. I remember there's an NES game called Bad Dudes or whatever. Yeah, Bad Dudes. And I remember like basically the storyline in that one was someone had kidnapped the president and we need, bad dudes to go save him or something. And that was it. That was the only premise you needed. And the whole game was you just kind of running around shirtless, punching people. And you think about Wolfenstein, you're just shooting Nazis. There wasn't a whole lot to it, but that of course all changed as games began to evolve. They started becoming works of art, right? If you think about it, there's a lot of things that go into it. There's storytelling, there's pacing, there's artwork, there's dialogue, there's music to them, and a lot of thought has gone into some games. And there's a lot of bad ones, and there's certainly a lot of good ones. And so I've really come to enjoy those experiences that are very deep and enriching as the games have evolved throughout the years. And so now I find myself, really enjoying a game is almost like I'm able to interact with the world and I get to experience this world, and there are hints at something deeper and something older within the world. There's cultures that get made up. And I think a lot of people that make these games really get an enjoyment out of building these worlds, and then to have people experience those worlds, and to see their reactions, I think is very fulfilling to someone. And I like being a part of that. There's a lot of great memories involved in some of the games that I've kind of played through. And so that kind of brings me to this next point regarding nostalgia. So nostalgia is a very powerful thing. Everyone experiences some form of nostalgia in their life, and I think what constitutes nostalgia has evolved over the generations. Perhaps our, grandparents or great grandparents would have had nostalgia in, say, locations, right? So the homestead or the farm where they grew up, there was a lot of memories involved there. They can recall like, oh, we used to run through these fields and we used to find these special rocks, that were I don't know, something special about them, or there's this old tree that we used to play around or under, and they have all these memories associated with the location, and this became a very nostalgic thing, or maybe it's, their particular state and the things that make up that state's culture. If you're, perhaps from Philly, the Philly cheesesteak, the different sports teams might be something that you kind of gravitate toward that have this like deeper meaning, and these are all sources of nostalgia. And it's fun that video games have kind of become a source of nostalgia for a lot of people. Mario is sometimes a source of nostalgia for a lot of people, and there's a lot to be derived from having nostalgia. It's very comforting. It recalls you to a time when things were simpler. You didn't have the same worries that you have today, and you were in a state of mind that was probably more innocent. You didn't feel as broken as you might feel today. And so this is going to be something that's very, very comforting to people. And it feels even better when you can share that nostalgia with someone. So going back to, maybe our grandparents, they find someone who like, hey, I was from the location next to you. I was, it was about 2 acres. We owned like two or 3 acres next door to that farm, and I grew up around the same place. I remember that street you were talking about or whatever. And you find someone from your hometown and you share this like common culture with them, and that can be very exciting for a lot of people, very comforting. And so video games provides this commonality between people. It provides this source of nostalgia that many people can just share and reminisce about, and it kind of can bring people together. It can help you form friendships and relationships, and there's just a lot that goes into into this experience. And it's just amazing to me that video games provide that. And I'm not really sure what's gonna become of video games kind of going into the future. I mean, we've got it's far more widespread than it was before, and um, just not really sure like how that's going to play out. Like, is everyone going to have this like one massive shared experience? But maybe, maybe not. I mean, there's a lot of genres within video games. I've noticed that there's a lot of people, who are reminiscing about playing competitive type games like Halo 2. They remember, being looking for, groups to play Halo with, and people who were staying logged into the Halo multiplayer servers, after they had been decommissioned and that kind of thing, or trying to stay in to not let them decommission. The last person logged out. There's like this big turning of the page kind of thing for a lot of people. I was never really into those types of games, so I never really shared that. It never really spoke to me, but I understood, that many of those players who had that experience growing up playing Halo with friends, sometimes strangers from around the world, was deeply satisfying. For them to talk about that and to have that shared experience. And so that's why to me video games has had this really nice kind of quality to them. And I think that even with the different genres, we can still enjoy these microcosms of nostalgia with people. Even though video games are so widespread, we can still find people who share, the same genre that they liked, that we also like. Something else too, in regards to video games that I've really enjoyed. This has been the last several years since really getting out of college. Video games took on a completely different um, source of entertainment and interest for me. Um, as I developed my professional career, I've always really enjoyed systems, wrapping my head around systems, trying to become knowledgeable about a system, almost viewing it as this like living organism, so that when I see it react in a certain way, I try to understand why exactly it reacted in that way. Um, and so a lot of times I'll be playing games, and in my head, I'm trying to think about how this system, kind of works, and not the systems within the game as part of the gameplay mechanics. Like a lot of RPGs or character building stuff, you're trying to manipulate attributes of your character to achieve certain things, to work in conjunction with a certain set of abilities and to find certain gear that also enhances that to, min max some kind of result that makes you very overpowered or whatever it is you're trying to do. I'm talking about like at a lower level of the video game. Like, how's it actually doing all this? And learning in college about how um, so my background has to do with computer science and things like that. You learned a lot of the lower level things of how these computers work. And so it was fascinating to me to realize, like, or just to appreciate just how these complex games were actually implemented on a computer. And so it was really fun to kind of delve into that. So I started trying to make my own games. Um, and I don't want to call it a success in that I really enjoyed doing it and I made a functional game. Not in the sense of success like other people liked it. It was objectively a terrible game. But I had the game loop and I had, the different things I was doing to calculate collision events, and you're trying to track all these different things, and you have to update, like you have a trajectory that some like a projectile is moving, so you have to update where it's going. Then you check to see if it's colliding with something to decide what to do with it next, and how you integrate some graphics into that, changing them, letting things like an animation has to progress over the next couple of frames. So you have to track that. Um, and then dealing with inputs and how does that affect things, all this stuff, um, to trying to understand how video games work. And it was always the whole thing is very fascinating, so I really enjoyed kind of digging into that. um, I guess something for those of you who may not be super familiar with, I always thought this was really cool, so I thought I would share it in regards to video games. When just to give you an appreciation for what it's doing, we're very used to just kind of seeing these graphics play out on the screen. We don't really appreciate, I don't believe, how complex of a process that is and the effort that goes into it. You have to understand, and this may not be the case with with the more advanced graphics cards, but you have this idea of um, these two windows, and depending on um, what you're doing, one window is displayed at any given time. And so what the graphics card is actually doing is actually it's projecting, I will say, the canvas um, onto your computer screen, and then what it does in the next frame is it projects the other canvas to the screen. And while it's projecting one canvas, it's actually drawing on the other one. And so in this way, 'cause you might think that it has to simply draw the entire screen, like it puts all the pixels in place, and then it displays it, and then it has to erase the whole thing like an Etch a Sketch and redraw the whole thing. But in fact, it's kind of flipping back and forth between either canvas, and whichever one it decides to show, it shows that one, and it begins painting the next screen on the other one. This is always very fascinating, just to think like that doing this kind of swap back and forth, but just to appreciate like what goes into drawing all those little pixels and stuff. And it's not as simple as an XYZ thing. I mean, or XY thing. I mean, there's some of that, but they've built layers of abstraction on this, and there's a lot of math involved in things, and a lot of tricks that are playing out behind the scenes. Things like occlusion. Why render something behind another object when the player can't see that object? So you don't render that. But to know to, don't render this particular object, we need to track it. So when it does reappear from behind that object, we know to start rendering it again. It will, different strategies for keeping the memory optimal, right? We don't want to keep everything in memory, especially if the player is not currently looking in a certain direction. We actually unload textures and objects behind the player or out of the player's view. But we don't want to unload all of them because the player decides to start moving quickly in either direction. We want to make sure that things are still kind of there. But this is just, I say all that to say there's a lot that goes behind the scenes. I don't have enough time, and I would say not even enough technical knowledge to go kind of deep into that. But I was just kind of hoping to kind of whet people's appetites. If that's something that you'd be interested in, you should definitely check it out. Learn some more about how video games are developed. I will say there's a video game called Factorio, and if you look that up, it's a great game. It's fairly simple, which is a little deceptive, I would say. It's actually a very deep game. Um, it's easy to get into, very difficult to master, but it can be very fun to build all these different things. But Factorio was under development for a long time. I had gotten into it when it was in its beta phase. I don't remember. It was right before, about a couple weeks, maybe to a month before it was released on Steam. But they have a developer's blog. They call it the Friday Facts. So if you go to the website, you can probably find their blog, and I would invite you to go to the very first one and kind of start reading through it. And they kind of walk you through. There's like almost 400 entries, probably more maybe, of that blog. And in that blog, they will sometimes dive really deep into some very technical things about video game development that's absolutely fascinating. A lot of the math that goes into it, ways of predicting things and modeling stuff, and fluid dynamics they were trying to recreate, and lighting and all this kind of stuff. They really get into some pretty deep stuff. And it's a lot of fun, and I think it would give you a really nice appreciation for video games. So I would invite you to check that out. But that's really all I have to say. So I hope you'll join me in my next podcast. I haven't determined what I will talk about, but hopefully it'll be something that's interesting. So thank you for listening, and bye.